So, hello everyone, I am Prem Ansh Sinha. I am the editor-in-chief of Ramjas Political Review. For today's episode of Ramjas Political Review Global Village, we have with us Mr. Shyam Saran. Shyam Saran ji was the former Foreign Secretary to the Government of India and the former chairman of the National Security Advisory Board. Mr. Saran, I came across a very interesting thing while researching on the questions yesterday. A Kathmandu Post article reads, You are wrong, Shyam Saran. The article dates back to the year 2016, which is a response to your article that was published in Hindustan Times titled Kathmandu's Triumphalism about China is Misplaced. And it calls your observations one-sided and statements factually incorrect. I went through it. I found one or two reasonings quite genuine, and I was unable to give proper reasoning to it despite going through it over and over again. And I would like to bring that to you. It raises questions about the forceful expulsion of over 100,000 Bhutanese, Nepalis or Lota Shampas in 1990. And it says that it happened with the approval of India, and it questions the democratic phenomena that India teaches to Nepal. So what is your view on this, that over 100,000 people, that was around 1/6 of the population of Bhutan, was expelled to Nepal? So what do you see, how do you see this as?
Why is India considered to be guilty of something?
They say that the Bhutanese military was heavily involved in this particular thing, and all of us know that Indian military is quite in symmetry with the Bhutanese military as well.
No, we have a military training team in Bhutan.
Okay.
But there is no assumption that the Bhutanese army follows the instructions of the Indian training team there. Whatever may have been the decision taken by Bhutan to expel those people of Nepali origin who were resident in Bhutan but were not citizens of Bhutan. They had presumably gone there to work in Bhutan over a period of time. And Bhutan wanted to make sure that a lot of the illegal immigrants who had come into the country should go back to their country. And that particular decision was taken by Bhutan. India had nothing to do with that decision. Now, it is another matter that it is true that most of these people went back to Nepal through Indian territory, because they could not get back to Nepal except through Indian territory. But that India allowed them to use Indian territory to go back to their country of origin. I cannot see why somebody should believe that India is complicit in terms of that expulsion.
So you said that these particular people who were expelled to Nepal, they were illegal immigrants. But while doing another level of research, I came across an article on The Diplomat, where it was written that these people have been in Bhutan since the 1620s, and they were the Devar craftsmen who were brought to build a stoop in Bhutan. So this is a very popular narrative that is there.
Maybe a popular narrative.
So can we say that they are illegal?
In terms of what their status is, or what is the history of their having come and lived in Bhutan, that is something which is between Bhutan and Nepal.
Okay.
It is not something that India should be brought in as somehow being connected with that particular controversy.
Okay.
Yeah. The only role which India played in that respect was, as I mentioned to you, that it provided transit to those people who came through India and went back to Nepal. But India did not have any complicity in terms of that decision taken by the Bhutanese government. So if there is any responsibility in terms of that expulsion was really something that should be a question posed to the Bhutanese government rather than.
So why did Indian government did not interfere in this? We have seen that we have been a part of such. Whenever such a thing has happened in a neighboring country, we try to micromanage those states, these issues in those states. So why did we not interfere when 1/6 of the population?
So
of
I think
Bhutan,
the assumption that you are making that India micromanages affairs in its
Okay.
neighboring countries, that's simply not correct.
Okay.
These are independent sovereign countries.
Okay.
How can India, consider it to be appropriate to interfere in their internal affairs?
So let me
we
get
do
back
not
to-
want any outside countries to interfere in our internal affairs. Why should we do the same to other countries?
So, but in 1950s, we saw Pandit Nehru writing an explicit letter where he admonished the PM, MP Koirala, about the heavy expenditure of the Nepalese delegation when they attended the coronation ceremony of Queen Elizabeth II, and they said that they no longer have the Rana rule in Nepal and they should be spending their amount wisely. Although this was a very wise advice that was given by Pandit Nehru, the former Prime Minister of India, this was not received well by the Nepalese government, and it was seen as an act of interfering in their rights. So how do you
what was the precise reason why?
So they had been. What happened was the delegation that attended the coronation ceremony of Queen Elizabeth II. They spent something that was not expected from them. They incurred the amount was spent on partying and various other things, which Pandit Nehru did not like, and thus this letter had been written.
Yeah. So I'm not very sure what is the precise reason why Pandit Nehru might have raised this issue. The fact is that during those early years, India was providing a great deal of financial assistance and resources to Nepal, which, as you know, has been a very poor country. And there may have been a reason why Pandit Nehru may have thought that, on the one hand, India is supporting Nepal with such assistance, and on the other hand, that the resources that Nepal should be using perhaps much more wisely was not being used.
So do you agree with the view that in the initial years in the 1950s, after the 1950 Treaty of India-Nepal Treaty of 1950 was signed, India was actually
well, India was certainly the country which had very close relations with Nepal, and as you know that the Indian government under Mr. Nehru played an important role in the restoration of the monarchy in Nepal, because Tribhuvan was more or less like a puppet king.
But we saw King Mahendra turning against the government of India.
Well, that is something which happened later, because the kind of person that King Tribhuvan was and what King Mahendra was, they were two very different people.
Right.
On the one hand, Tribhuvan was ready to accept a political dispensation of democracy, multi-party democracy in Nepal. And so the Nepali Congress played a very important role in that respect. By the time we come to King Mahendra, that situation has changed.
Okay.
Because King Mahendra feels that the multi-party system is not necessarily very appropriate to Nepal.
Okay.
That Nepal's development required having perhaps a much more strong political leadership, and he also saw an opportunity for Nepal and for himself to expand the role of the monarchy by taking advantage of the fact that there was a new tension building up between India and China.
Okay.
So, in 1959, the Tibet revolt takes place. Relations between India and China become much more tense, much more difficult. And in that kind of a situation, Nepal, and particularly King Mahendra, felt that they could have greater space, greater opportunity to assert their independence and sovereignty vis-a-vis India, because India was the main influence, most powerful influence in Nepal at that particular point of time. So it played very well with Mahindra that he was able to use this opportunity not only to create a certain amount of distance between India and Nepal, but at the same time he could take the action that he did with respect to internal politics in Nepal by asserting that multi-party democracy was not suitable for Nepal and that Nepal would do better by having a much strong political leadership with a monarchical form of government. So you have to examine the political context in which some of these changes took place.
So you say that it is not fair to examine them independent of the context under which King Tribhuvan was.
So since you are all political science students, it is important for you to, in terms of examining or analyzing political events, to look at not just a particular set of events, but always to conceptualize it. That is, what is the setting within which a certain decision may have been taken by a political leader, or why did India take a certain foreign policy direction that it did at a certain point of time. Sometimes we look back upon something and then criticize it from our current standpoint. That is not the way to analyze the situation. You have to look at what was happening at that time. So that historical context becomes very important in terms of coming to the right kind of conclusions about any particular political development.
Right, sir. While we are talking about King Tribhuvan and Prince Mahindra, who later became the King of Nepal as well, if I'm not wrong, and let's go back to the time when India stood against the Rana rule in Nepal, and the Indian ambassador to Nepal, I think it was Mr Shyam, who granted asylum to King Tribhuvan in the embassy of India in Nepal. What do you think of the whole situation? What was the context behind it? What was the reasoning that India thought that King Tribhuvan could be a good alternative to the Rana rule? Could you provide us some historical background to it?
The Rana rule was, ruled by a certain narrow, aristocracy in Nepal. It was certainly not democratic, and it was a government which was very much against any form of democracy, much less multi-party democracy. When India's national movement was taking place, at that time, there were Democrats from Nepal who also took part in India's own national movement.
Okay.
So the Nepali Congress leaders, like Kukreja, for example, they became part and parcel of the Indian national movement.
Okay.
So there was a very close affinity between those democratic forces which were trying to fight for their own place in Nepal with the Indian national movement. Now, the Indian national movement was not only a movement for independence, but it was also a movement for democracy.
Okay.
So the kind of political dispensation which we adopted after independence was a liberal democratic state. And now, obviously, those who were working together with the Indian National Congress here in India wanted that their countries also should move in the direction of democracy like India.
Right, sir.
And it should come as no surprise that there was considerable amount of support and affinity on the part of India for those democratic forces in Nepal. So the train of events that followed after this was really to see how India could support those democratic forces in Nepal to establish a democracy like India had established in its own country.
Okay.
Now, you could also argue that there was a certain strategic dimension to it. Strategic dimension being that this is going to be, from the point of view of India's security, a very, very important country.
Right.
Just being south of the Himalayas. So, in terms of safeguarding India's security, having a government in Nepal.
So India's security from which place? Because China did not.
So
India
you had already in 1950,
right,
you already had China which had moved into Tibet. Okay. Tibet until that time was almost an independent country. Right. And we had very strong, cultural links, religious links with Tibet. Okay. So even though through history China had tried to claim its sovereignty over Tibet, but the fact is, historically it is true that for most of its history, Tibet was not under Chinese rule. So when in 1950, when Chinese troops moved into Tibet, in a sense this was the first time that India and China had a broad boundary between each other. Before that they didn't have a boundary except for in the western sector with Xinjiang and Kashmir. So both from the point of view of that political affinity as democratic forces, but also from the point of view of having a government in Nepal, which would also be sensitive to India's security concerns, this was something which India certainly promoted and encouraged, that there should be a legitimate government which should come into power in Nepal, and the legitimate government was that of the king Tribhuvan. So the Ranas were not rejecting monarchy. They said yes, the monarch is the ruler of the country, but essentially as just a figurehead, not as exercising actual power. So what India did at that time was to say the person who's only being treated as a figurehead should actually be the person who should be exercise the power. And that is how, whatever train of events that you are talking about took place, where Tribhuvan became the king and opened the door for multi-party democracy to be established in Nepal, which survived till 1960.
Right, sir. Before moving ahead with the next question, while we are in that particular decade, I would like to bring up another question to you with respect to the 1950 Treaty of India and Nepal. When this treaty was being designed, did India expect that the border that Nepal shares with Tibet would cease to exist and it would be the People's Republic of China that would be taking over Tibet after? Like, was there any? If I'm
so
not
1950,
wrong,
when we are talking about 1950, as I mentioned to you, 1950 is also the year where the Chinese forces have moved into Tibet.
So we were moving.
It was already very clear to India that the security landscape for India had already changed dramatically. That it could no longer look upon Tibet as a vast space which, in a sense, kept China away from India.
So it was no longer. We knew that it was no longer. It would no longer be a deterrent to China. And
what could not be a deterrent? Tibet had ceased to exist as an independent
But
country.
we were trying to send delegations to Tibet in the mid-1950s. Pandit Nehru was sending delegations to request them to apply for the membership of the United Nations. It is mentioned in Mr. M.K. Raskotra and his former secretaries as well.
What you must remember is that in 1949, when China established the People's Republic, from then on, China laid claim to all the territories which belonged to the old Qing Empire.
As they say, a palm with 5 fingers.
Yeah. So, whether it is Xinjiang, why is it called Xinjiang? Xinjiang means new territory. It is new territory because it was incorporated into the Chinese Empire at a much later date. Before that, it was not part of China. So the situation that we faced as an independent country after India became independent in 1947 is that you had a Tibet which was, in practical terms, it was independent, but which China laid claim to. Not only the PRC, but before PRC, the Republic of China also laid claim to Tibet. So when a Tibetan delegation was invited to the Asian Relations Conference, which was held in 1947, the ROC representative, Republic of China representative objected to that, saying how can you invite somebody from Tibet, which is not an independent country. So this question of the status of Tibet was already, being talked about, whether or not we could treat it as an independent country.
Right, sir.
Now, in 1950, China said there is no question of there being a kind of a semi-independent Tibet, because even the British earlier had said China does not have sovereignty over Tibet, but China has suzerainty over Tibet.
Okay.
Now, suzerainty is something which goes back to the imperial age.
Right.
There is no concept of suzerainty as far as, our modern day world is concerned. You are either independent or you are not independent.
Right.
So this kind of a halfway house that you have formal kind of claim over the territory, but actually practical terms, you have to treat it as independent, that could not work.
Right.
Now, unfortunately, we inherited that particular concept about, the Chinese have suzerainty over Tibet, but they don't have sovereignty over Tibet. It could not have worked. But more importantly, the question is whether or not India in any way could have prevented the Chinese from sending their troops into Tibet and beginning to exercise political control over it. We could not. We simply did not have the military capacity, the troops, etc. And we are talking about a country which is at 15,000 feet, general altitude. Where do you have troops which are in a position to fight at such altitudes without kind of conditioning, without kind of being made for several months acclimatized to that? So that was not a practical alternative for us. Now, if we saw that this was going to be a new situation that India would be facing, of a major power at its doorstep, after a history of not having to worry about this border at all, because the Himalayas are, almost like an impregnable fortress behind which we are. That changed in 1950. Now, you should also realize that at that particular point of time, these were kingdoms, the Himalayan kingdoms were there. That is, you had Nepal, you had Bhutan, you had Sikkim, which was at that time, still a kind of a protected status of India. Now, these countries were also very much, scared of what was happening across the border in Tibet.
Right.
All these Himalayan states also had close linkages with Tibet, historically. Now, when the Chinese, a communist regime, came into Tibet, there was also a sense of danger not only in India, but also these Himalayan states. So who would they look to safeguard their interests or safeguard their security? They looked at India. So the 1950 treaty between India and Nepal should also be seen in the context of that new kind of security landscape, which emerged after the establishment of the PRC in 1949 and the invasion and control occupation of Tibet by China in 1950.
Right, sir.
That is the context within which you have the India-Nepal treaty.
That was a very comprehensive answer. You answered my second question, which was about the covert and overt operations that were, India is often criticized to lead covert and overt operations in Nepal with respect to terrorism and smugglers that are there. They claim, the Nepalese government claim that India is sending its R&AW agency. Even the former special director Amar Bhushan in his book Inside Nepal writes that R&AW had launched a covert operation to bring down the monarchy in the 1990 with story of Jeevanathan and Prachand, who is who is having his third term in Nepal. So do you think that India tries to interfere with the machinery?
This is a very sort of general question. And does India interfere or does not India interfere? I think again I will want to caution you that number one, do not go by accounts written by retired officers who may have a certain view of how developments were taking place, or try to talk about their own role in some of these events. I think we have to analyze in a very dispassionate way what were the drivers of whatever development we are looking at. Why did such a development take place?
So what you're trying to say, we have to look at the developments in an independent way, and we have to also add.
So you have to try to examine. It's very easy. It may make a very good story.
Right.
These chaps were engaged in a cop and robbers kind of a situation, or a cloak and dagger thing. Somebody will try to make out what great operations we were carrying out. There may be no way of even verifying whether somebody was carrying out that operation or was not carrying out operation. If there are really confidential operations, no government of India is going to tell you that yes, we carried out this operation or not carried out this operation. So that is I don't think that is a very productive way of analyzing events as political analysts. So our main effort should be to try and see why did India follow certain policies with respect to, say, Nepal or Bhutan, or with respect to China at a particular period of time. What were the drivers of the policies that the government of India was taking?
Does India have a policy for Nepal? Because over time we have seen that there has been there hasn't been a singular policy that has been implemented over time.
No policy will be, for you to think there is one single policy and if that policy is not followed, India doesn't have any policy.
Okay.
That's a very superficial way of
policies keep changing.
Policies evolve as the situation evolves. So to expect that India should be following just one particular policy with Nepal and it must not change, if it changes, it means India does not have a policy towards Nepal. That's a very superficial way of analyzing events.
Because this was a criticism that was done by Dr. S.D. Muni in Oxford Handbook.
I'm not here to answer what S.D. Muni may have said. I'm here to answer what concerns you may have, and you want to understand what India's policy with respect to Nepal has been or with China has been. I can try my best to explain to you from my perspective what that policy is and what did it make any sense.
Right, sir.
Okay, because what you may be seeing as the inconsistencies of India's policy, or you may be seeing certain gaps in India's policy, some of those are real. Not every country has absolutely perfect kind of policies that it follows. Many cases you are predicting something to happen, it does not happen.
Right, sir.
So we are not supermen who can decide what is the best policy to follow. If you take, say, Nepal, as I mentioned to you, Nepal, what is the reality? Nepal's reality is that, one, it is part of India's security perimeter.
Right, sir.
That is, if any hostile country manages to entrench itself in Nepal, then it has a serious security implication for India. Therefore, it is quite natural that India would be concerned about whatever developments are taking place in Nepal and what is the nature of Nepal's relationship with other external actors. Are those external actors hostile to India, or are those external actors, more benign with respect to India? So the reason why Nepal is important to us, it should be quite obvious.
Right, sir.
Okay, from the security point of view. Second, we have an open border with Nepal. Okay. There are no restrictions. People can come, go back and forth without any kind of restriction. Now, when you have an open border with that country, again, it should come as no surprise to you that we would be deeply concerned about any kind of, terrorist activity or, inimical activity which takes place through that border. Okay. So many of the policies that we follow take into account what the reality is with respect to that relationship.
So let me get back to the 12-point accord that I think you also played an instrumental role in.
You go step by step. You're jumping from one thing to another. It becomes very difficult for me to.
Right, sir. So that's the whole idea of it, to make sure that.
No. Okay. So you are not relating the 12-point program to exactly what may have been the relationship between India and Nepal. If you just pick up one thing and say, okay, what did you do here? That doesn't give you if you really want to understand India's foreign policy and you want to understand India's policy with respect to another country, then number one, you have to understand the overall context within which we pursue that relationship. Okay, and then you can get down to specific. Now, if we are talking about the 12-point program, do you know the context within which the 12-point program was agreed upon?
So there was a 10-year-round struggle between, there were 7 parties, and all of them were on a very different, all of them held very different view of each topic, and we required a negotiator. They required someone to negotiate on behalf of them to bring this struggle to an end, because the people, I think revolution was being led by the Maoists. Maoists had a very different agenda, other parties had a very different agenda, and it was not coming to a solution. So that was the whole idea of having an accord.
No.
Is it that? Okay.
That's not the case.
Okay.
So again, this is where I think it's important for you to understand the context within which these kind of developments are taking place. So you are right that there was a 10-year insurgency which was led by the Maoists. Okay. The Maoists started in Western Nepal as a kind of a radical group, really being driven by the very deep sort of social and economic distress that the people of that region were facing. And therefore, like in India, the Naxalite movement in tribal areas, economic and social grievances of long standing, that is what led to the development of this particular insurgency. That is, the political process was not able to deliver for them the kind of relief they were looking for, the kind of economic and social development that they were looking for. They started off as a very small group, basically representing this kind of resentment in the local population, but then it started growing. Okay. Now, when it started growing, this was also around the time that there was a tussle taking place between again the same thing that I mentioned to you in the 60s, multi-party democracy, monarchy. So Mahendra had managed to establish a panchayat democracy, partyless. Okay. Then you have Birendra coming in, who continues the same process, but then you have the Andolan in 1990s, when multi-party democracy comes back, and then you have what is known as the constitutional monarchy and multi-party democracy, 2 pillars of the Nepali state.
Okay.
So a certain space being created again for political activity by political parties. Okay. Now, that process meant that there was a constant battle between the monarchy on the one side, which wanted to keep on asserting its own power, and the political parties on the other.
Okay.
Yes, it is true that the political parties among themselves had various kinds of tensions, disputes, but at least on the aspect of multi-party democracy, they were more or less together. Now, this was the time, as I said, when this Maoist insurgency started developing. It started developing as not a very big movement. If it had been controlled or addressed at that time itself, perhaps it would not have developed into a major insurgency that it became. But it got caught in between this tussle between the monarchy and the political parties. The political parties wanted, for example, the Nepali army to help in curbing this insurgency.
Okay.
The king was not prepared to do that. Now, the army was always under the king, despite the fact that this was a multi-party democracy. But as far as the Royal Nepal Army was concerned, it was under the direct control of the monarch itself. So he would not agree that the army could be used in order to deal with the security issue which had cropped up in Western Nepal thanks to the Maoists. So what happened was that over a period of time, the insurgency started expanding further and further and further because there was no adequate response to that. So we come now to a point where you have 3 players now. You have the multi-party, you have the political parties, you have the monarchy, and now you have a 3rd player, the Maoists,
yes, sir,
who are becoming more and more influential. Now, the role that India played was, to begin with, recognizing the danger that this insurgency posed, to Nepal's security, which could also create complications for the simple reason that I mentioned why Nepal is so important to you in terms of security.
Right.
What would happen in Nepal would have an impact on India. Now, supposing you had this left-wing insurgency in Nepal, which started expanding, in India there was a fear that this could link up with the Naxalite movement in India.
Right, sir.
So you would have almost like what they used to call like a red corridor from the north to the south. So there was a vested interest that India had in not allowing this insurgency to become even more powerful. So initially, for example, when I went as ambassador to Nepal, our effort was to try and convince the monarch, convince Prince Gyanendra or King Gyanendra and the political parties that they should work together, because if they did not work together, then they could not handle the insurgency.
Right, sir.
Okay, and India was prepared to help Nepal state and the Nepali army with arms, for example, with training, to try and deal with this insurgency, because it was also, as I mentioned to you, in our own interest.
Right, sir.
Right? Now, the importance of the political parties and the monarch working together, we understood, we tried to convey, but the monarch, Gyanendra, again felt that it is only a strong one leader who could actually handle this challenge.
Okay.
So at times he would even reach out to the Maoists, at times he would reach out to the political parties. There was no sort of consistent kind of approach by him. Why? Because he was trying to make sure that he was able to remain in power as a sole authority. Now, when it came to a point where he took over power entirely in his own hands, there was February 2005, he had almost like a coup,
right,
and he took power and he, in a sense, delegitimized all the political parties. That is where India had to make a choice. Do we go along with him? And because some people felt here that it is only through him and the Nepali army that we could deal with this Maoist insurgency. There were others who felt that no, the king had overstepped, and it is for India to make certain that the Maoists and the political parties come together in order to resist, this kind of grab of power by the king. So India did play a role in convincing the Maoists that you should abandon violent methods,
Okay.
and you should also join, the multi-party democracy system as a political party, not as a revolutionary army. And if you are prepared to do that, then you can come together with the political parties so that you are able to resist and to frustrate the effort made on the part of the king to try and grab power entirely. That is the context in which the 12-point program came.
So I have a very controversial and a very sensitive question that I would like to ask. So, do you think I would like to get back to the context behind it? India has the communist parties, and Mr. Sitaram Yechury was also involved in many of his statements about whatever was happening in Nepal. And what he said was that sending Dr. Karan Singh as a special envoy to Nepal during this period was the wrong option, because it was giving them mixed signals that if he is going there to defend, say, democracy or monarchy, because he was quite close to King Gyanendra. So what do you think of this criticism that was done by Mr. Sitaram Yechury?
See, again, you must take account of the situation within which the government of India took a decision to send Dr. Karan Singh. I also accompanied
Right.
Now, as I mentioned to you that the 12-point program has been concluded, at that particular time, our effort was to try and convince the king that you should revert back to the role of a constitutional monarch. That is, you are there as the ceremonial head, like the British monarch is, or as the president in another country may be, but not exercising active political authority. Okay? That you should accept the fact that your grab at power has not worked.
Okay.
And you have only succeeded in bringing both the Maoists as well as the political parties together. Now it is a question of, do you want the institution of the monarchy to survive? And what India is prepared to do is to try and see that at least your status as a monarch, constitutional monarch, that is preserved, provided you accept the principle of, multi-party democracy.
Right, sir.
That political power should really be in the hands of the political parties, who will conduct elections. Whoever emerges victorious in those elections will lead the country. So Karan Singh's role was limited to that aspect only, messaging to the king that your effort to try and keep power in your hands and singular authority in your hand is not working. You are going to be in danger. You will be threatened, because there was a massive, popular mobilization taking place, movement taking place. This is something which your own survival may be affected. So you should accept a role as a constitutional monarch and allow the multi-party democracy to be re-established.
Right, sir.
That was his message. How can anybody object to that?
Right, sir. That's fair. Sir, there was another criticism that I would like you to throw light on that. The 12-point accord did not have any reference to the 1950 India-Nepal treaty, and the parties and the leaders who came to power after that treaty, they criticized the accord, and they said that they would want some of the points to be withdrawn or updated. What do you think of it?
The 12-point program had nothing to do with India.
India, yeah, right, sir. It was about the safety and...
It is between, the 12-point program was between the Maoists and the 7 political parties. So where does India or the Indian...
The point number 10 actually mentions that it would try to maintain cordial relationship with its neighbors like China and India, especially India and China.
So what's wrong with that?
Okay.
I mean, the point is that the 12-point program had nothing to do with...
It was about, what you're trying to say, that it was only about Nepal, it did not have anything to do with India.
Nothing to do with India.
Sir,
even though it was facilitated by India.
Okay.
Certainly. I mean, India provided both the venue and provided the means for these parties to come together and conclude that accord.
Right, sir. Sir, I would like to bring something interesting for you. I would be reading a sort of a poem that was actually recited in front of Mr. N.K. Rajputra when he was in Nepal, and I would like to know, this was something, he thought of it as something that the people in Nepal had a popular opinion of it. It is a long poem and it goes something like the rains and the floods come year after year and the bridges go down, but these are not repaired, nor new ones erected. Look southward beyond the hills, they are bridging the Ganga. Oh God, give us a leader like Gandhi and a Raja like Nehru. So this was the local sentiment this was a popular sentiment in the people of Western Nepal. Do you think during a time in Nepal, did you come across any such positive reaction in the people, or do they hold? What sort of sentiment did you come across in Nepal and the local people there?
Well, number one, you cannot generalize.
Okay.
It's not that people of Nepal are one monolithic entity,
right,
and all of them have the same opinion.
Right.
Different Nepalis have different opinions. Now, there is a certain elite opinion in Kathmandu Valley. They have a very strong sense of Nepal's own independent identity. They have a very strong sense of Nepal's sovereignty. They would like to maintain a certain balance in the relationship that we have with India and, say, with China.
Right.
But at the same time, also most Nepalis have very strong cultural and even family links with India. So even if you take the Nepali elite, you take, for example, the Rana families. Most of the Rana families get married in royal families here in India. So why did Dr. Karan Singh go to Nepal? His wife belonged to the Rana family in Nepal. Okay, many of the royal families we have in India, all of them have connections with Nepal.
Right.
Okay, so that's a very strong point. You have today in India a very large number of Indians of Nepali origin. You take Sikkim, almost entirely
right,
Nepali. You take Uttarakhand or Himachal, many of these states in India have very large populations of Nepali origin people, but who are Indian citizens. But they also have connections across the border.
Right, sir.
You have people from Bihar and UP who have very strong connections with the family links with the Madhesis on the other side. So the kind of density of people-to-people relationships which exist between India and Nepal are unprecedented. They do not have a parallel anywhere. So even though we are two independent countries, that kind of people's connect is very, very strong.
Okay, sir.
Okay. Similarly, you have religious linkages, you have cultural linkages. So as far as the general sort of sentiment towards India is concerned, it is one of very close affinity. That doesn't mean that some people are not very angry about something which happens in India, or Indians don't get angry about something which is happening in Nepal. But generally speaking, there is a very strong connect. Also, until recently, we had very large number of Nepalis serving in the Indian Army.
Right, sir.
Okay. Now, many of those people who retire, go back to Nepal, they are settled in various villages. Now, they still retain a very strong, connect and affinity again with the Indian Army. So, as far as the people-to-people relationship is concerned, it is very, very strong, and I would say mostly very positive.
So, before I move to the last part, because of the time constraint that we have, what do you think is the way ahead for India to deal with Nepal, given the PRC is planning on building some infrastructure projects that is not going well with, of course, that will not go well with India. So, how do you think we would be tackling these issues when the Chinese traders and businessmen would come closer to our borders? How would India react to it?
So, India is already reacting to it by, India has to present itself as a much better partner that China can. So, what does India have?
Do you not think Nepal enjoys this thing that India...
Every country will try to do that. We also do balancing.
Right, okay.
So that Nepal or any of our neighboring countries tries to, balance what it considers the danger of domination by India by reaching out to other countries, that is quite normal.
So this will not end, according to you. This will go on.
No, the thing is, what are you able to do?
Okay.
To be the partner of choice for any of your neighbors. Okay. If you are able to show to your neighbors that actually their interests are much better served by having a strong relationship with India, then you don't have to worry.
Okay. So let's move to the second part, which is about the Indian Foreign Services, and I wanted to talk to you a lot about it. How appropriate do you think the current selection process of people, students, or the interested people into the foreign services is? Because all of them go through the same procedure, and we are seeing that there is a certain criticism that we should be recruiting the people, the officers in the foreign services through a very different procedure. What is your take on this?
Well, the question is whether or not the people whom you are already recruiting through the current, civil service examination process, whether that is working well or not working. I have not seen any particular criticism that the people who are coming through this process are not really qualified to serve as foreign service officers.
That's fair.
If somebody can point out to me what the downside to that is, then we can consider, okay, what is the alternative way of recruiting people. But I would say that so far, my experience has been in the foreign service that the people whom we have recruited through the civil service examination process, like in any other service, there are people who are very good, and there may be some people who are not very well suited for this.
Like it happens everywhere.
That is something which happens. Much more important is what is the kind of training process you have? What kind of capacity building do you do? How do you train them up to be good diplomats? That is far more important than just who you have brought in.
So during your time as a diplomat, you must have come across a lot of politicians and senior leaders across the world. Did you come across any particular person, and do you think that your view of that person is quite contrary to the popular opinion held by the masses? is there any certain politician or a certain head of a country that you met?
Well, I don't think I have even thought about, whether my view of a particular leader is
something that would be unpopular.
No, the thing is that again, people whom I have come in contact with as part of my career, I have had good experiences, and I may have had some bad experiences, but that is again quite normal. So I have had heads of missions with whom I have got along very well. I have served with prime ministers like Narasimha Rao. I have served with Atal Bihari Vajpayee ji. I have served with Manmohan Singh. I have had great respect for these leaders, and I have found them very statesman-like in their approach. And for me, it has been a great and privileged experience working together with them. So I have not had a experience which I can point to and say, this person was not like.
Perhaps you can save it for your autobiography.
No, whether I'm going to write an autobiography, that's a different question. But as I said, I mean,
right.
we come across in our career, we come across different people. I mean, diplomacy is all about human relations.
Right, sir.
What kind of because ultimately everything is how you interact with your counterparts. How do you interact with people you come in contact with? It's all about engagement. It's all about communication. So in that respect, I think I would rate my experience in the Foreign Service as being very positive.
So for the last question, I would like to ask you: do you think there is anything that you could have done differently as an Indian Foreign Service officer? Something that could have altered, let's say, a certain policy that India has currently, or something that could have altered? What I'm trying to say is something. Do you have any regrets about a certain decision that you took while being an Indian Foreign Service officer, something that would have turned it into...
Well, number one, you must realize that decisions that are taken by me as an individual are not my decisions.
Okay.
I mean, there is a system.
Okay.
So whatever policy I may have been implementing with respect to Nepal is not my policy.
Let me think that better. Do you think that there would have been a distinction between, do you think that was there a certain time where what your personal opinion was different from the official standard of India?
I mean, that's very normal, because the job of a civil servant, whether he's from the IAS or whether he's from the Foreign Service, is to present to the political leadership advice and options which, in my best professional opinion, I want to give. Okay. So I would say, with respect to Nepal, which you have been talking about, supposing I want a certain policy line to be followed. Now, I cannot personally follow that policy line unless it is a decision which is also endorsed by the political leadership. Now, there have been occasions where what I felt should be done is not accepted by the political leadership. Now, in that situation, as a professional civil servant, I have to accept that even though my advice is not accepted, I, as a civil servant, have to carry out the decision that has been taken.
Right, sir.
Right?
Let's say that you hold a strong opinion of something. Were you, as a foreign secretary or an ambassador, allowed to keep it in front of the foreign minister or the person who was in charge?
I have never had occasion where I have not been able to express my frank opinion or give frank advice on any particular issue. There has never been an issue where I would be scared that the foreign minister's view may be different, and therefore I should be...
So the government of India is quite open with...
at least my experience has been quite open. I mean, we have had, the Cabinet Committee on Security, which sits down and discusses important security-related issues or foreign policy-related issues. Now, in those kind of debates that we have, internal debates that we have, it is not necessary that my view is necessarily accepted by the rest of the people.
Right, sir.
Because I have a certain kind of perspective, and I am putting forward my perspective to the best of my knowledge, and
right, sir,
whatever professional experience I have, I am trying to give advice based on that. Now, the Prime Minister has many other considerations. He is not only looking at narrowly at the foreign policy aspect that I am putting about, he has to think about, for example, what the domestic consequences would be.
Right, sir.
Okay. He may be thinking about larger issue in terms of, relationship perhaps with other major.
So there is a difference of perspective. There is a
yes,
difference
there would be occasions where he would accept what I am trying to bring across, because he said, okay, you have the professional, experience. You have an insight because you have served in that country or because you have served in the foreign ministry, so you have a certain advantage in giving an advice. So I accept your advice. In other cases, may not. So you as a professional civil servant has to accept that there will be occasions where what you are presenting as your advice or opinion
might not be
may be accepted, in other cases may not be accepted.
Right.
And the bottom line is that having given your advice, you have to carry out whatever is the decision finally taken by the political leadership, even if it does not conform to what you may have advised.
Right, sir. Right, sir. Thank you so much, Mr. Saran, for
Okay,
presenting.
thank you.
Thank you.